Well, I think that tournament is not quite up with 1972, but pretty damn close. And it's close only because of what was going on with Donald Trump and tariffs. 72 was purely a test of world hockey skills. 2025 was very much a political hockey game. The perfection of it came from the fact that it ended up being Canada versus the United States in the final, and Canada triumphed when Canada needed something.
That is Roy McGregor. When I was thinking about who to talk to about this unprecedented moment we're experiencing in Canada, where hockey, international politics, tariffs, annexation have all come crashing together, I couldn't think of anyone better than Roy McGregor. Roy has won all the awards for journalism, covering politics, covering hockey, and so much more over a 50-plus year career. Currently, with the Globe and Mail, he's written over 40 best-selling books. One of them was about hockey written with a Canadian Prime Minister. Another was about hockey written with a Hall of Fame goalie turned federal cabinet minister. And he's done all of that in an incredibly thoughtful way, rooted in a deep love for this country. He was awarded the Order of Canada and is a fellow of the Royal Canadian Geographical Society. I'm really happy to have him as our guest on this special Hockey, Politics, and Patriotism episode of Explore, a Canadian Geographic podcast. Welcome to all you explorers out there. Armchair and in motion, I'm your host, David McGuffin.
And here's my problem with Canada. Canada was meant to be the 51st state.
The old relationship we had with the United States, based on deepening integration of our economies and tight security and military cooperation, is over.
That's new Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney and U.S. President Donald Trump in the wake of Trump's tariff war on Canada, with an apparent aim of annexing this country. In February, smack in the middle of that turmoil, came the Four Nations face-off.
Two great teams going at it. Should make for entertaining hockey.
This Four Nations face-off matchup is underway, and the gloves are...
The first international best-on-best hockey tournament in a decade, featuring the world's two best teams, Canada and the U.S. When it came to the championship game, there was basically zero chance politics wouldn't get involved.
And when there is a big hockey game on, is the president watching for the goals or for the fights?
Probably both. I think he's watching for the United States to win tonight, so he looks forward to watching the game tonight, and we look forward to the United States beating our soon-to-be 51st state, Canada.
Centering pass, McDavid scores! Connor McDavid wins it for Canada!
On va régler tout sur le patinoire, as they say here in Quebec. We'll sort it all out on the ice. With that overtime golden goal by Canada's Connor McDavid, a nation rejoiced. So now let's get to Roy McGregor to figure out what all of this means.
Elbows up, pal.
Elbows up. Elbows up. So there's a lot going on with hockey and politics right now.
It's goofy.
It is unbelievable. Booing the anthem is probably where this all started in terms of the blend and tariffs and Trump, and then booing in Canadian arenas across the country. And then, but I really want to get to the Four Nations because that seemed like a bit of a high water mark.
Yeah.
In terms of the hockey, just pure hockey, how was that tournament for you?
Well, I think that tournament is not quite up with 1972, but pretty damn close. And it's close only because of what was going on with Donald Trump and tariffs and the Canadian coming election. 72 was purely a test of world hockey skills. 2025 was very much a political hockey game. And so politics, I do not believe in 72 that we were trying to, shut down the communists or anything, as some people said. I think it was just that we did not believe that anybody could be as good as us. And we barely proved that we were right, or we can claim that we were right. It was a fantastic series. And the Four Nations Cup, of course, didn't have Russia. So it was a great tournament, but it wasn't a perfect tournament. The perfection of it came from the fact that it ended up being Canada versus the United States in the final, and Canada triumphed when Canada needed something.
Exactly. And the guy too, McDavid, right? I mean, that's like central casting moment.
It was pretty funny, pretty neat.
So I have to say, I went into that tournament very skeptical as an Ottawa Senators fan. I was mostly worried about my players playing in the tournament and getting injured.
Yeah.
And I wound up watching pretty much every single game. I literally
Of course,
the Finland-Sweden games.
as a Senators fan, you had to be delighted to see that Jake Sanderson, who wasn't even on the team when they first went to the ice, and then they brought him in later because of an injury. And guess what he does? He stars in the final game, even though they didn't win. He scores a goal, and he looked great.
Yeah. And the other big name there is Brady Tkachuk, right? And what did you think of that Canada-US start to that Canada-US game with the Tkachuk brothers starting a line brawl, basically?
They're going to drop the gloves right away. Matthew Tkachuk and Brandon Hagel right off the hop.
I shouldn't say. I'm very much opposed to fighting in hockey. I thought it was wonderful. I'm sorry. I'm embarrassed. Go to the back of the class, McGregor. I mean, God sakes, it was. Can I dare say it was somehow appropriate?
Yeah. So I can tell you, in our family, and again, we're not big hockey fight people, but the room, we were all standing up, screaming, oh my God, what a dramatic.
It'll never be forgotten. I mean, it was like 1987, the Junior A punch up. And it'll be in the 72, and then it'll always be on 2025.
So the Kachucks both get involved early.
And every time they mention 2025, and the Kachucks out there trying to pound out the Canadians before the pucks even drop.
You have a unique career in that you've covered politics and you've covered hockey, both of them extensively. And so, I mean, you think this is the biggest blend of those two things, would you say, in our history?
Well, I used to joke when I went to cover hockey, and when I went from Parliament Hill to covering hockey, I used to say that it's almost exactly the same thing, except the politicians don't have numbers on their backs. Right. You know, you have the scrums at the end, you have the BS going on, you have the little inner workings, the inner stories and that. But hockey and politics has been blended for longer than you and I have been alive, you know. We grew up hearing that somebody was stick-handling some legislation through the House of Commons. We grew up hearing that somebody in the House of Commons was filibustering, which meant they were ragging the puck. We grew up thinking all these metaphors from hockey applied to politics, just as the United States. People fumble the ball, or they make all these football metaphors. But without this hockey, and even got richer at times in that we had people. We either had ex-hockey players like Sil Apps, or running for office, becoming a cabinet minister. Frank Mahovlich elevated to the Senate.
Yeah.
Red Kelly ran for office when he was still playing. And he was there for 3 years in Ottawa, going back and forth between the Toronto Maple Leafs. Bobby Orr, they rumored about him. He was a friend of Mulroney's. They thought maybe he'd run for office in 84. And that would have been in Muskoka Parry Sound. And I've never forgot Stan Darling, one of the funniest people, caricature really of politicians that I ever had, you know, big super Coke bottle sized glasses, a little squat guy, chubby.
Yeah.
He says, if he wants to go against me, he better keep his head up in the corners. Yeah, I mean, we've always had this link. And
I think Don Cherry, I mean, every time there's election, I remember a hockey night in Canada, Don Cherry would be talking about how he's being courted by the two main parties.
Yeah.
Yeah, or let alone, you wrote a book with Ken Dryden, right?
Ken Dryden became a cabinet minister, and did very well. I mean, it's always been there. I suspect it always will be, but I don't think it ever raised its head as high as it did during the Four Nations Cup. The booing of the anthem, which was so un-Canadian.
Yeah.
Can you imagine, David, anything more un-Canadian than for us to show disrespect to another country's anthem? It never happened when they played the Russian anthem at the Olympics.
I've been to games, many games where Canadians are singing the American anthem.
Yeah, of course. And then, well, it changed us, that the funny cliche about the elbows up, and that's a hockey term too, of course, from Gordie Howe. I'm going to say that I've liked it. I have never felt more Canadian since, the cliched years of 1967, for example, the centennial, 72, the hockey series, the various things that we did that were so wonderful, whether it was military or that. I just felt good this last couple of months about being Canadian and seeing Canadians who usually are at odds with each other, depending on where they live, not at odds with each other.
And in terms of just sort of taking it beyond hockey, like in terms of the realms of national crises and stuff that you've seen and covered, I mean, like thinking of the FLQ or, 95, the referendum in Quebec, which was very close. I mean, where does this rank, do you think?
It's the worst. I covered referendums. I was at Oka
Yeah.
when it was a situation. I've been there when everybody thought it was the end of the world, and it wasn't. But this time, what began, I truly believe began as a joke. I hope began as a joke, turned into a real story that Trump really, really wanted to do this and really wanted to hurt Canada. And I don't have to go down the list of what we have done for the United States. Every time we have been an ally that has been 100% reliable and more. And then suddenly to find out that our so-called closest friend is dumping on us and accusing us of things that aren't true and attacking us and trying to disorient us and trying to leverage things so that I don't for a moment believe that Trump ever actually thought he could take over Canada, but to destabilize us as he's doing to Greenland right now. After 50 years of journalism, in all my life, I never thought that I would cover not only a person, but a group so unaware of reality, so obsessed with their own selves, so wrong, and so unwilling to listen. And Canadians have not comprehended, and I don't comprehend, how do you deal with someone who lies all the time? It doesn't matter what the situation is, you get a lie thrown back at you. You can't stand there and forever say, but that's not true, but that's not true, but that's not true. You sound like an idiot. And yet, the great lie, and that goes back to an awful lot of stories, whether you're talking about Hitler, Mussolini, Putin, or anything like that. The great lie of America is really, it's not concrete, it's not 100%, but it is destabilizing the world, and in particular our world.
Yeah, in a way that it hasn't been since.
Not in our lives.
Probably not since World War II, probably,
Yeah.
right? I mean, as you mentioned earlier, we're now in a federal election campaign. So this has all woven itself right into that. And I mean, you're looking at, I'm thinking particularly of Mark Carney and the Liberals. I mean, almost his first campaign event was, ice time with the Oilers. An elbows up campaign ad with Mike Myers in hockey jersey.
Mr. Prime Minister, Mike Myers, what are you doing here? I just thought I'd come up and check on things. But let me ask you, Mr. Prime Minister, will there always be a Canada?
There will always be a Canada.
All right, elbows up.
Elbows up.
What do you make of that?
I'm astonished. 3 months ago, I was telling people, I would say, first of all, Trudeau is completely dead. He's done. He's finished. And then even after he was saying that, well, he would resign, and their thinking was that he would resign, I thought, there's no way in the world that Pierre Poilievre cannot become the Prime Minister of Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Polls aren't perfect, but polls are also pretty indicative of what's going on. And he was so far ahead, there was no catching up. Then you have the issue with Trump's victory, first of all, but then more importantly, Trump's early discussions about Canada and not being a real country in the 51st state and Governor Trudeau and things like that. It really got our elbows up and transformed us and had the odd effect of elevating the Liberals, and particularly elevating the Liberals when they get a new leader, Mark Carney, who has international creds, which does not apply whatsoever to Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative leader. Mark Carney may not be slick, he may not be glib, he may not be the perfect candidate, he may not relate completely to the ordinary people who we like to think are Canadians, but we see this person as someone who's capable of standing up, at least at the moment, to Trump. And we do not see that in Poilievre, because all we've seen of Poilievre is a very narrow-focused, angry person talking about the country is broke. Well, we've discovered in the last 4 weeks, the country ain't broke. It's got its elbows up, and it's fighting, and it's found itself. It's almost like, I don't know what to describe it. It's like, I use the word finding itself, but it's almost like self-discovery and something that we'd forgotten, except for various times along our life maps, whether we were talking about Centennial 1967, the birth of the flag in 65, the victories, very narrow victories about keeping the country together on the referendums and that, the shattering experience of both the Meach and Charlottetown Accords, the Spicer Commission, which showed how disjointed and angry the country was. Well, we survived all that, and then we run into this thing, which is worse than anything.
I mean, we seem to be stepping up to it, though, right? I mean,
I like it.
I mean,
I'm proud of us.
There's a degree of patriotism I haven't seen in this country, again, I don't think in my lifetime. And so this election, too, I mean, most consequential election since when, would you say? Is this 88 or?
No, I'd say ever. You and I are old, but we're not old enough to remember what Canadian soldiers did or what the Canadian military did for Holland, for example, for Europe, for the United States when they got into various predicaments, whether it was Afghanistan or whatever. And there would be these incredible moments of pride. And I imagine after World War II, it was a way, 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 way up there. But it's up there now. It's up there now at a level that we have never seen or felt before. And frankly, it feels pretty good. In some small, almost ridiculous way, I'm kind of glad this happened because it showed my country that we are a country. We are the people we thought we were. And even though they joke about us being so polite and being so harmless, we're actually pretty tough. And we're showing that toughness, and I love it. And I'm not even going to split it down political lines. I'm not going to say Carney's showing it. I'm not going to say Poilievre's showing it or Singh's showing it. Everybody's showing it.
Yeah. And so we just step back to hockey for a second? Can I get your thoughts on Wayne Gretzky and what that moment in all of this has meant?
I have so many great friends. One of them is the great one, Wayne Gretzky. I said, run for prime minister, you'll win it'll take 2 seconds. But he said, well, am I going to run for prime minister or governor? You tell me. I said, I don't know. Let's make it governor. I like it better.
Awkward. My experience with hockey people, and I have to be very careful here because I used to work with him and I know him pretty well and have tremendous respect for him. There's something about the way that, let's say, I'll name two players, Gordie Howe and Jean Beliveau. They essentially, as television came along and media came along, they showed the hockey world how Canadian hockey stars were expected to act. Deferential, kind, decent, maybe tough as nails on the ice, but soft and generous off the ice. And that basically became the pattern that other players coming along, stars, would follow. So you have Bobby Orr, and then you have Wayne Gretzky. They're always talked about as being the best players ever. And Bobby Orr, he was involved with Mulrooney, for example, in the 1980s. Well, that's not really a sin. He was thinking about running, or they said he was thinking about sunning. Anybody took some criticism for that. He also endorsed Trump 4 years ago by taking an ad in the paper. And that ad, as you know, David, was word for word what a whole bunch of other people printed and paid for it. So basically, Bobby's being asked to do this thing. Bobby's such a nice person and always wants to please, and that he does that, but he kind of hides it in an oblique New Hampshire paper that nobody was going to really read except media got onto it. And then you have Wayne Gretzky, who's living down in Jupiter and living among those kinds of people and gets invited down to Mar-a-Lago and probably was quite flattered by that and ended up going down. And then Trump, of course, being no fool, he attaches himself to celebrity. And Wayne, who's, I hope I'm not being hopelessly wrong here, but it's the way I'm seeing it. He's just trying to help out or whatever. And it's fine for Bobby Orr and for Wayne Gretzky to be Republicans or conservatives, whatever they want to be. But it's disturbing to Canadians at this point to see these people who are the icons of our life arm around somebody that we actually quite despise as a people. And then to see that today where someone quoted the statue out of the arena at Edmonton with human feces.
The Gretzky statue, yeah.
That's pretty low, you know. I think there's one other thing, too, that we expect our hockey players to be extraordinary on the ice. Why do they have to be extraordinarily off the ice, too? Why do they have to be endlessly articulate and able to talk their way around things or through things and that? Mostly, as we know from every between-period interview we've ever seen in our lives, they just want to please and get the hell out of there. No one has ever talked about how articulate and insightful and brilliant people like Orr, Howe, Beliveau, Gretzky are. They do talk about how nice they are off the ice, but they do talk about how great they were on the ice, and that should be their legacy.
If he were to ask you for advice on this, what would you tell him?
Wayne?
Yeah.
Well, I was kind of hoping he might. I didn't want to approach him and ask, but I was kind of thinking that if he didn't, I'd lend an open ear, because I think that he could have explained. Janet tried to explain in some ways, but that's not the same as Wayne. He didn't really have to explain much. He just had to say that, you know, he could even say he's a friend of mine, and that he didn't have to go all political. And I think, knowing him as I do, he'd be quite hurt. I knew his father quite well, and his father would not be, Walter would not be happy about this at all. I don't know. I confess to being in a bit of an awkward position, because I've been a friend of his for a long time, and I have not felt, I just don't want to attack his statue or his reputation.
Right. Difficult situation, because he's a person that's meant so much to this country for so long.
He's a good person. I've never had he's done some wonderful things for people, as is Bobby Orr. You know, I had a friend here in Ottawa who was dying of cancer. He ran a bookstore, and is a wonderful person. He lived up by you. And he was sick, and I met with him, and he said that his lifelong hero was Bobby Orr. So I went home and made a couple of calls. And the next thing I know, this package arrives at Paul's door, and it's an autographed framed picture of Bobby Orr scoring the great goal. Yeah. And then after that, Bobby phones him twice just to encourage, you know, how are you getting on? How's it going? That. Well, Paul didn't make it. When his funeral was held, he was in a casket, and right above the casket was the painting, or the signed photograph that Bobby had sent. Well, nobody paid him to do that. Yes, yeah. I asked if he might send out a little signal. I never expected anything like that whatsoever. And these are the things that don't get reported on, but throw an ad about supporting Donald Trump in a little New Hampshire paper, and it's all over the media, thinking that you deserve to go to hell. Well, sorry.
Worse for Wayne now than Bobby, though, because of the tariffs, because of the 50
social media,
and social media.
Social media. You know, there are things that 50 years from now we'll look back on and try to understand. One will be what COVID did to people, and the other will be what social media did to politics. Yeah. And social media and politics, and this whole attitude that comes out of Trump and Elon Musk, and that of the legacy media is dead, dying, and a liar. Very damaging. Very damaging.
Well, especially because legacy media is in bad shape too, right? I mean, it is definitely wounded, right? It's not, I mean, you were working in newsrooms in Ottawa that probably were 10 times bigger than they are today, you know?
Oh yeah, I feel like a blacksmith.
Yeah.
You know, I once had a very important role, and I would go to the Ottawa Citizen. You could hardly talk for the clatter of typewriters. You could hardly see for the rise of smoke above the things, and
cigarette smoke.
Everybody shouting and yelling. So much excitement. And now, the last time I was there was hardly anybody there. And now if I tried to go, there is no Ottawa Citizen building. It's being turned into a roller skating rink. And what is the Ottawa Citizen is a bunch of people who work from home and do Zoom calls in the morning to decide what they're going to cover. And they don't have a lot of man-woman power, so they do what they can do. I don't begrudge them that whatsoever, but it's not the same.
What's the danger of that for Canadian politics?
Well, the danger that I see from social media is many dangers. One is the disinformation, the lies, the anonymous trolls, the bots that don't even really exist but are out there causing all kinds of trouble things we don't even know about now. We're talking about Indian and Chinese interference in our political system.
I mean, what does it mean for you to be Canadian in this moment?
Well, look, I'm Canadian to the core, almost to a cliche level. You know, the Citizen used to do a little joke all the time about who's the most Canadian person you could find, and often they'd end up with me. And I like that. I thought that was fine. What does it mean to be Canadian now? It means that I'm goddamn well going to protect my Canadians. If the Americans were to take over Canada, I would leave. I will fight in I'm an elderly man now. What am I going to do to fight? But I would fight in the ways that I could. And I truly believe, absolutely to the core of my soul, that we will never become an American state. Canadians have no interest and will have nothing to do with it. And it cannot be forced upon us, even though stupid Trump might believe it can. Nah, ain't going to work.
No, I saw Stephen Harper. I was actually at a Canadian Geographic event. Was saying that even if it means we become impoverished, we cannot give in to this.
Yeah, he's looked good. He sounded good. I'm with him.
And I have to say, that's another politics and hockey blend, isn't it? Because you worked on a book about hockey with him once.
I did, yeah. I forgot about that. Yeah. I mean, I didn't forget about it, but I should have mentioned it.
Well, listen, thank you for taking the time in this very odd time that we're living through.
Well, it might not be the worst time, David. It might be something that really reignites in us the joy and pleasure we get from being who we are.
Forces us to think who we are, right?
Yeah, and I'm not running around thinking that, well, I'm not Alberta, I'm not Quebec, I'm not this, and I'm not that. I am all those things, I hope. And I hope they feel that they are all these things as well. Canada is Canada is Canada.
Well, Roy, it's always a pleasure, and thanks so much for taking the time to talk.
Yeah, thanks, David. It's a great talk. You take care.
Roy McGregor's latest book is a memoir, Paper Trails, From the Backwoods to the Front Page, A Life in Stories. And check out episode 44 of Explore for Roy's interview about canoeing in Canada. It remains one of our most popular ever. Thanks to all of you for listening. The Oregon rendition of O Canada you're hearing right now is from Game 3 of the 1972 Canada-Soviet Summit Series. It's being played at the Winnipeg Arena by the late Barry Anderson. If you enjoy this podcast, please remember to give us a rating and review where you listen. It helps others to find us. And when you're talking about podcasts with friends or family, tell them about Explore, why you like it, and share a link of an episode you enjoyed, like this one. Until next time, when we'll explore again, elbows up, I'm David McGuffin.